Guten Morgen. Wie geht es Ihnen heute? Ich bin so froh, mit Ihnen in meiner Muttersprache zu sprechen. That was how I spoke when I was 9. I spoke English too, but with a heavy German accent. It was a cool and rainy day in Frankfurt, Germany, the day we set off to move to a new land. My brother and I piled into the back of our green Citroën, while our parakeet Peter sat in his cage between us and entertained us. We drove through Germany and then the lowlands of Holland, singing German songs and listening to Peter whistle, not knowing anything about the new place we were going to call home. The long, choppy ferry ride didn't do much to comfort me, but I was excited, even though I was leaving behind everything I had known for the first 9 years of my life. Not only did they speak a totally different language in a unique accent in England, but they drove on the wrong side of the road. A few weeks after arriving, I attended my first day of school, dressed in my crisp, clean school uniform, my blue beret tilted just right. Yes, we had to wear berets every day. I was eager to meet my new classmates. I was nervous, of course, but I was also excited and wondered what these kids would be like. At recess, I went out to play when a group of them approached me and went, "Heil Hitler!" I was stunned. I wanted to disappear into the ground. Other than my German accent, I had nothing to do with Hitler. Didn't they know I was just a kid like them who wanted to play and make new friends? That was the beginning of years of being branded the outsider. I even remember an English school teacher slapping me on the wrists one lunch, shaming me for holding my knife and fork like a foreigner instead of a proper British person. Knowing I was different made for difficult years. I learned that to fit in, I had to become like them. So I worked hard to speak the way they did, to drink tea and eat biscuits the way they did, to be restrained and formal in my interactions the way they were, because it felt like a matter of survival. I contorted who I was in order to be accepted. My American enthusiasm and curiosity had to be dulled, my German exactness had to mellow, and my foreign accent had to go. I had to abandon much of who I was in order to fit in. Feeling like the outsider can do that to us. It can make us pretend we're different than who we really are, so we fit in. It can make us silent, so we go unnoticed. It can cause us to abandon our culture and ourselves in order to belong. That was only the first of many cross-cultural moves in my lifetime, and each time I faced the same choice: be myself, stick out and remain the outsider, or adapt and conform to the dominant group's demands. I wanted it to be okay just to be me, despite having a different accent and being multicultural. In each country where I lived, I remained the foreigner. In the US, I'm labeled English, despite carrying an American passport because my father was American. In Germany, I'm thought of as American. And in the UK, I'm simply considered foreign. I don't truly belong anywhere. Now, I'm aware that my sense of being the outsider, of not belonging, may be mild in comparison to the relentless experiencing of othering some may encounter, especially now that xenophobia is seemingly endorsed in public life. Some of us have more obvious differences we wear on our skin, or in our less able bodies, or in our gender, our clothing, our accents, or our age. Others of us have more subtle differences expressed through our sexual orientation, our beliefs, our faith, or our upbringing. I'm aware that my privilege, which I experience daily through my skin color, my economic position, my accent, my education, and my appearance, allow me to be part of an in-group that many do not automatically gain access to. In fact, I cannot imagine the constant othering that happens to my lawyer friend with cerebral palsy. Every day, wherever she goes, she's subject to microaggressions as she navigates this world in a scooter with a body that doesn't look or work like the bodies most of us have. Every day, people treat her as less intelligent and a problem that must be surmounted. Every day, she has to make her way around a world that is set up for able-bodied people, that screams with yet another staircase, "You are different. We don't care about you here." Every day, she's treated like a stranger. Now, I wonder how many of us here have ever felt different from the crowd or like the outsider. I'm curious, if you're willing, raise your hand if at some time in your life you identify with an experience of being the outsider or being different or being the stranger, whether it was when you were younger or as an adult. And that's most of us. America is a land of immigrants and relocation. I think about the involuntary immigration of Africans into slavery, who were not only forced to go to a strange land, but were then subjected to degrading, oppressive conditions upon arrival. I think about the much maligned Irish in the 1800s, followed by the Germans, the Slavs, the Italians, and later the Jews, not to mention the vilified Japanese. I think about the immigrants from Mexico coming to California, which was their land, by the way, less than 2 centuries ago, who are often disrespected and undervalued in our country. Many of them are now living in fear that they or their relatives will be deported, even though they've spent most of their lives here contributing to our economy and welfare system. I think about the women and girls wearing hijabs, who are often taunted and threatened, and the millions of Muslims in our country who are fearing being persecuted, registered, and ostracized for their religious practices. Our fear of the outsider as a nation has reached frightening extremes, especially with the growth currently of white nationalism. Comedian Jon Stewart said, "We have always been a nation of immigrants who hate newer immigrants." And yet all these foreign people, these strangers, given the opportunity, will soon become our neighbors, our friends, even perhaps our relatives. Despite thousands of years of evolution, we still act like tribal people. We flock to where we think people are like us, where we feel like we belong. We move into neighborhoods where people look like us. We join churches where people think like us. We're so desperate for community that we will choose our friends, our political party, our sports teams, based upon this unconscious desire to belong, to be part of something larger than ourselves, to feel at home. And this is natural. But as soon as we identify as the majority or the in-group, others automatically become de facto outsiders. We create a dynamic of us and them. When we think our tribe is superior to another, we devalue others. When we start to believe that our viewpoint, even our wholly liberal viewpoint, is the only correct and true perspective, it makes others wrong. And we're seeing the effects of that now in the outcome of our election. Dismissing another because they're a stranger or different or because we don't understand them is the easy, instinctual, fear-based way for tribal humans to behave. And so we asked our new members earlier and told them I was going to be challenging them. And I challenge us all now today, because the harder practice, the stretch for us, is to extend ourselves across that difference, across that which makes us feel uncomfortable. And that requires us transcending our reptilian tribal brain. And it's not easy. Ironically, we all have a piece of the outsider inside us. All of us have at some point had a new home or a new school, a new community or city, or been a stranger in a group. But that vulnerable part of us that is felt like the outsider may also lead us to close up and reject others who are different. To protect ourselves. It may lead us to try to keep outsiders out. In fact, it was said that Hitler possibly had Jewish ancestry, so he was rejecting part of himself. Sometimes our own fears, our own wounds, lead us to cover up our lack of belonging, our own insecurities, and in turn, reject others. We want to feel safe, we want to belong, and we want to feel at home. So it can be uncomfortable to invite newness into an established group. In our congregations, there's an inherent tension between liking who we are as a community now and not wanting to change versus opening ourselves up to strangers and the unknown influence of others, just as we are doing today and we do every Sunday. There's an inherent tension between wanting to grow and attract new members and families while not wanting to sideline long-term established members who have done so much to build the community. But we need an influx of strangers for our communities to survive. Welcoming the stranger, as uncomfortable as it may be, forces us to stretch and grow beyond our baser tribal instincts. Welcoming the stranger encourages us to become more than if we remain cloistered and comfortable in our own groups and ways. Welcoming the stranger may even be necessary for our survival as a people and as a faith. Because it's the strangers who will transform us, just as we transform them. It's the strangers who will open our hearts and minds and breathe new life into our midst. It's the strangers who will save us. Because no culture, no society can truly thrive without the influx of new blood, new gene pools, new ideas, or new ways of doing things. Without the new, we stagnate. The world's great religions all invite us to welcome the stranger. The Hebrew Bible reminds the Israelites to treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The Quran says, do good to the neighbor who is a stranger. And the core of humanism suggests ethical, moral behavior that calls for kindness to our fellow human being. And our own Unitarian Universalist faith guides us to remember our interconnected web. How we welcome one informs how we welcome all. How we treat one affects the greater whole. What we strive to do as Unitarian Universalists is actually profoundly countercultural. At our best, we try to move towards difference, embrace it, honor it, and understand it. Our aim is not to simply be tolerant, but curious, inclusive, and welcoming. And this is one of our greatest strengths as a faith. It's who we aspire to be. But there's aspiration, and then there's reality. And we know the two don't always join. There are too many times when we aren't inclusive, my friends, when we don't reach across difference or we don't communicate well. There are times when we fail as allies to those who need it most. We're flawed human beings, after all, who give in to our reptilian, tribal brains more often than we care to admit. But in spite of our failures, we usually work to repair them. And eventually our commitment to our Unitarian Universalist principles and values calls us back to creating a just world and acting from compassion and integrity. It's who we aspire to be. So what would it take for us to truly welcome the stranger and not just sing, "Come, come, whoever you are"? What would it take for us to create an environment of radical hospitality to the stranger here in our congregations and beyond? Now, I know some of you have been attending here a long time, and others much shorter, and some may even be new here today. But so that we all get a sense of what it might be like to be a stranger in a new community, I invite you to come with me on a brief dystopian fantasy, and I need a drink of water before we go there. Imagine you've moved to a new city where you don't know anyone, and you're looking for a community. So you go to your local church. As you walk in, no one greets you. You feel nervous, out of place, a bit embarrassed, and you try to figure out where to go. You can't find a visitor's table or a greeter to orient you, and you don't want to stick out by asking. You want to join in, but you don't know what the norms are in this congregation. You don't know where to sit or when to stand or where the hymnals are. You'd love to go to the restroom before the service, but there are no clear signs, so you wander around trying not to draw attention to yourself, but everybody seems to be rushing around. And those that aren't are in small groups having seemingly intimate conversations with their friends. So you feel uncomfortable. But you participate in the service anyway and hope things will become clearer. And during the service, they ask you to raise your hand if you're new, which feels a little exposing, but you hope someone notices you and then they'll talk to you later. After the service, no one comes up to you to welcome you and show you where the coffee hour takes place. So you wander around and eventually find the coffee. You stand in line, and they don't have red cups like we do. You finally get a cup and then stand alone drinking it. Nobody talks to you. Finally, you put your coffee cup away and decide to go home. So imagining that, how are you all feeling right now? Yeah, I'm not feeling so good either. In fact, I don't know about you, but I'd probably never go back to that congregation, would you? So let's imagine a different way, a way that shows radical hospitality, in which we live into our principles and values as Unitarian Universalists. Now, many of you know that before becoming a minister, I was membership director at the Unitarian Society of Santa Barbara for several years. Welcoming the stranger was my job. What I learned was to actively seek out a stranger or anyone who seemed lost or uncomfortable, remaining sensitive to the fact that some newcomers may want to blend in and not be talked to. I would introduce myself to others gently when it seemed appropriate. Together with my membership team, we'd attempt to connect by being curious and listening to each person's unique story. What brought you here? What are you looking for in a community? Are some of the questions we might ask. And while honoring our differences, we endeavored to find commonalities. And then we'd introduce ourselves to the newcomers who might share and ask about their interests or circumstances. And of course, we'd invite them to join us in upcoming church activities like an upcoming community forum or a movie night. And when they returned the following week, which they often did, we'd remember their names, hand them a name tag, and ask specific questions pertinent to their lives. And so through this very simple process of first being gently curious, next seeking connection, and then offering an invitation, these newcomers felt welcome and soon began to feel integrated into our community. So should you ever find yourself hesitant to welcome a newcomer or speak to a stranger, I invite you to wonder, what gifts might this stranger bring into our midst? What might I learn from them? Curiosity, connection, and invitation are the foundation for radical hospitality. How different my experience would have been at school in England if the children and teachers had approached me in that way, asking me about myself rather than making assumptions, and seeking connection with me rather than highlighting our differences. How different would it have been for the newcomer to the dystopian congregation being greeted with curiosity, connection, and invitation? What a new world we might create beyond our walls if we actively engage with strangers or people we don't understand by being curious, trying to find points of connection, and being inviting. The miracle is that in reaching across the divide of newness and difference, we may find that strangers aren't that different after all. We may find that they become the us of our future. And isn't that what we really have to be committed to during these new polarized times? How can we allow them, who may seem so different on the surface, become one of us? Or better yet, try to erase the divisive idea of us and them, and remember that we are all connected. We are all one. In closing, then, may we keep our hearts open to the stranger by remembering that we too were once the outsider. May we be welcoming to strangers, leading with curiosity, connection, and invitation. And may we always honor our interconnectedness by showing radical hospitality towards all. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. May it be so.